The insidious scent of burning plastic, a smell utterly alien to the familiar comforts of her home, was the first herald of the encroaching disaster. It was a subtle warning, easily dismissed, but it was followed by a heat that seemed to press in from the walls themselves, a suffocating presence that stole the air from Clara's lungs. Through a swirling haze of gray smoke, she saw her son, Alex, his face a grim mask in the terrifying orange glow. They were inches from the front door, from life itself, when he committed an act that would forever be seared into her memory as both a terrible betrayal and a profound, inexplicable rescue. He released her arm. In the single most critical moment of her life, as she leaned on him for salvation, he let her go and turned back into the roaring inferno that had once been their home. The question of what he could possibly be thinking, what could be more valuable than their shared survival, screamed in the silent, terrified chambers of her heart. Stay with this story to witness the anatomy of a single, desperate choice, and to understand how, in the crucible of a fire, the lines between saving a life and breaking a heart can become terrifyingly blurred. For the 10 years since her husband Michael's death, Clara's life had been a quiet and loving vigil. The house was not merely a place to live. It was a shrine, a meticulously maintained archive of a shared life, cut tragically short. She kept his favorite books on the shelves, his worn reading glasses on the nightstand, and his laughter echoing in the halls of her memory. This house was the last tangible piece of him, a fortress built of love and remembrance against the relentless march of time, and she guarded it fiercely. Every room held a ghost. The kitchen was where Michael had always tried and failed to make the perfect pancake on Sunday mornings. The living room held the faint indentation in the armchair where he always sat. The backyard still had the slightly crooked fence post he had sworn he would fix one day. To lose the house would not just be losing a building. It would be the second death of her husband, the final erasure of the physical evidence that their beautiful, ordinary life had ever existed. Her relationship with Alex, now a quiet and introspective man of 20, was the central pillar of her existence, yet it was not without its complexities. He was a good son, dutiful and kind, but he carried a reservoir of quietness that she often struggled to interpret. She saw it as distance, a private world she wasn't allowed to enter, and she worried that he didn't share the same sacred reverence for the past, for his father's memory, that she did. Their love was a deep, powerful ocean, but they often navigated it from separate shores. A recent disagreement lingered in her mind, a small but telling example of their disconnect. She had wanted to frame an old, faded photograph of Michael, and Alex had gently suggested that maybe it was time to put up some newer pictures, photos of the two of them. She had reacted with a sharp, wounded defensiveness, and he had retreated into his usual quietude. The incident left her feeling misunderstood, and him, she suspected, feeling gently rebuffed, a minor tremor along a fault line she never knew existed. Despite these moments of friction, her love for him was the most primal, powerful force in her life. He was the living embodiment of her love for Michael, the best part of them both. She would have walked through fire for him without a moment's hesitation. She simply never imagined that one day she would have to watch him do the same, and that his reasons for doing so would tear her world apart before putting it back together. The fire announced itself not with a bang, but with a slow, insidious creep. The strange, acrid smell was the first scout, followed by the unnerving shriek of the smoke alarm in the upstairs hallway. The sound was a physical assault, ripping through the quiet Tuesday evening and plunging Clara into a state of pure, undiluted panic. Her book fell from her lap as she leaped to her feet, her heart instantly hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribcage. She screamed Alex's name, her voice tight with terror. Smoke, thick and impossibly dark, was already pouring down the staircase, a living, breathing monster that clawed at her throat and made her eyes stream with tears. It moved with an unnatural speed, a predator consuming the familiar safe spaces of her home and turning them into a vision of hell. The world narrowed to a single desperate objective: get out. Alex appeared at the top of the stairs like an apparition, his face pale and stark with alarm. He didn't hesitate, taking the stairs 2 at a time to reach her side. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm and reassuring, a point of solid reality in the swirling, chaotic nightmare. "Mom, come on! We have to go now!" he yelled, his voice cutting through the terrifying roar of the flames, which now seemed to be coming from all directions. For a brief, blessed moment, she was flooded with a profound sense of relief. Alex was here. He was in charge. He was strong and young, and he would get them out. They were a team, mother and son against the inferno. She clung to his arm as they stumbled through the smoke-filled living room, the heat, now a physical presence, pressing in on them, blistering their skin and making every breath a painful, searing effort. The front door was visible through the haze, a dark rectangle promising cool air and safety. It was only feet away. Hope surged through her. They were going to make it. They were going to survive. She felt her legs begin to weaken, her lungs burning with every ragged cough, and she leaned her weight on her son, trusting him completely to carry her, to pull her through those last, vital steps. It was in that precise moment of her absolute vulnerability that he let go. He didn't shove her. He didn't push her away. He simply released his grip, steadied her against the wall, and took a half step back. The loss of his supportive contact was so sudden and shocking that she nearly fell. Her mind, already addled by smoke and fear, couldn't process what was happening. It was a glitch in reality, a moment that did not compute. He looked at her then, for a fraction of a second, and his expression was one of such desperate, profound anguish that it terrified her more than the flames. His eyes were pleading with her for an understanding she could not possibly give. "I'm sorry, Mom," he rasped, his voice a broken, gravelly thing. And then he turned his back on her. He ran. Not towards the door, not towards safety, but back into the house. Back into the thickest, blackest part of the smoke. Back towards the rear of the house where Michael's old study lay. The sight of his retreating form, a silhouette against a backdrop of surging orange flame, was a vision so horrifying it stopped the air in her lungs and the blood in her veins. A scream tore from her throat, a raw, primal sound of disbelief and abandonment. Alex! He was gone. He had left her. In the final, desperate moments when their lives hung in the balance, he had made a conscious choice to leave her side and run towards something else. Something he had deemed more important. Something he was willing to die for. Her mind, fractured by terror, latched onto the only possible explanation: betrayal. This was the ultimate expression of the distance she had always feared was growing between them. In the end, he did not love her enough. He had chosen a thing, an object, some secret possession, over the life of his own mother. The thought was a shard of ice in her heart. The seconds he was gone felt like hours. Each tick of an unseen clock was a lifetime of agony, filled with images of the roof collapsing on him, of him being overcome by the smoke. She was frozen in place, unable to move forward to safety, unable to go back into the inferno after him. She was suspended in a hell of pure, helpless terror. A neighbor, a kind man named George from across the street, must have seen her lone, stumbling figure in the doorway. He shouted her name and then rushed forward, grabbing her arm and pulling her with a strength that finally broke her paralysis. He dragged her out onto the lawn, away from the collapsing porch, her mind still screaming her son's name even as her body was pulled to safety. She fell to her knees on the cool, damp grass, her gaze locked on the doorway from which she had just been pulled. She watched it, willing him to reappear, praying to a God she wasn't sure she believed in. The roar of the fire was a deafening symphony of destruction, the soundtrack to the worst moment of her life. Her home was gone, and she was sure her son was too. And then, like a miracle, he emerged. He stumbled through the doorway, a figure from a nightmare, covered in black soot and choking on the toxic air. He collapsed onto his hands and knees, gasping and retching. But he was alive. He was out. The wave of relief that crashed over Clara was so powerful it almost made her physically sick. But clutched in his right hand, held with a grip of grim determination, was a small, rectangular wooden box. It was scorched and blackened around the edges, but intact. The sight of it brought the cold rage roaring back, eclipsing the relief. He had made it out alive, yes, but he had still gone back. He had still left her. He had still chosen the box. The wail of fire trucks, growing closer, finally arrived, and the night erupted into a controlled, professional chaos. Firefighters swarmed the lawn, shouting commands, unreeling hoses. A young paramedic knelt beside Clara, asking her questions she couldn't answer, trying to check her vital signs. But Clara couldn't tear her eyes away from Alex. He had managed to crawl a few feet away and was sitting up now, his back against a tree, the box placed carefully on the grass beside him. He wasn't looking at her. He wasn't looking at their burning home. He was looking at the box, his expression a strange mixture of exhaustion, anguish, and a grim, unsettling satisfaction. It was the look of a soldier who had saved the standard but lost the battle. Clara shook off the paramedic's gentle hands. She couldn't go to her son. She couldn't close the distance between them. The image of him turning away from her was a physical barrier, a wall of glass and ice that she could not bring herself to cross. He was her child, her only family, and in that moment, he felt like a complete and utter stranger. She watched as the roof of her home finally gave way, collapsing inwards with a great whooshing roar that sent a fountain of sparks into the night sky. 10 years of memories, 30 years of a life, all gone, all turned to ash and smoke. A part of her felt that she should be weeping uncontrollably, but the grief for her home was a distant, secondary pain. The primary wound was the one her son had inflicted. Later, huddled under a scratchy wool blanket in the brightly lit, sterile living room of her neighbor, George, the silence between her and Alex was a chasm. He sat across from her, having been cleaned up and checked by the paramedics, a cup of untouched tea growing cold in his hands. He kept glancing at her, his eyes full of a pain she refused to acknowledge. In her mind, the event was replaying on a loop, each time solidifying her sense of betrayal. She saw his hand letting go of her arm. She saw his back as he ran into the smoke. She saw the box clutched in his hand. These were the facts. These were the moments that mattered. They formed a narrative of abandonment, a story where she was not the priority. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of suffocating silence, she found her voice. It was not the voice of a grieving mother, but the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. "What was in it?" she asked, her tone flat and cold, devoid of any warmth. "What was in that box that you would leave me to die for?" Alex flinched, as if she had struck him. He looked up, his eyes wide with a fresh wave of pain. "Mom, please," he began, his voice hoarse and broken. "It wasn't like that. I would never—" She cut him off, her own voice rising with the force of her stored-up terror and anger. "Don't you dare tell me what it wasn't like. I was there. I was choking. I couldn't see, and you let me go. You left me. For a box. So you will tell me, right now, what was in it." The last words were a command, sharp and brittle. He looked down at the box, which sat on the coffee table between them like a defendant in a trial. He seemed to shrink into himself, the weight of her accusation crushing him. For a long moment, she thought he would refuse, that he would cling to his secret even now. The silence stretched, each second hardening her heart a little more. Then, with a sigh that sounded like it was pulled from the very depths of his soul, he reached for the box. His hands trembled slightly as he fumbled with the small, smoke-damaged latch. The click it made when it finally opened sounded unnaturally loud in the quiet room. He didn't turn it towards her. He simply lifted the lid. Driven by a cold, furious need to know, Clara stood up and walked around the table to look down into the box. She expected to see something that would confirm her narrative of his selfishness. Bundles of cash, perhaps. Expensive jewelry. Some secret he was desperate to protect. Her mind had prepared her for a sordid, selfish secret. The contents were so unexpected, so utterly contrary to her assumptions, that for a moment her brain could not process what she was seeing. The box was not filled with valuables. It was filled with memories. On a bed of faded velvet lay about a dozen old, fragile-looking reel-to-reel audio tapes. Next to them, nestled in a corner, was a small silver music box, its surface blackened and tarnished by the heat and smoke. "What is this?" she whispered, the anger in her voice replaced by a profound and disorienting confusion. This made no sense. This was junk. Old tapes and a tarnished trinket. This is what he had risked his life for? This is what he had abandoned her for? The absurdity of it was a fresh wave of pain. Alex finally met her gaze, and his eyes were swimming with tears. "It's Dad's voice," he said, his voice so thick with emotion he could barely get the words out. "Grandma gave me the tapes last year, from when he was in college giving a speech. It's the only recording of him speaking that exists, the only way I can remember what he sounded like." He then reached into the box and gently, reverently, picked up the blackened music box. "And this," he said, his voice breaking completely. "You told me this was the first thing he ever bought you. You told me that whenever you felt sad after he was gone, you'd open it, and the music reminded you that he was still with you." Clara stared at him, his words slowly penetrating the fog of her anger and grief. She had told him that story, years ago, on a particularly difficult anniversary of Michael's death. She had forgotten she had even said it. In her panic, in her terror, she had forgotten the existence of these items. They were the things she treasured most, and she had left them to burn. "The house was gone, Mom," Alex continued, his voice pleading with her to see, to understand his desperate logic. "I knew it was gone, and I knew you could make it out the door. George was on his porch, I saw him. But I looked at your face, and I thought about tomorrow and next week and the rest of your life without these things, without the last pieces of him." He was crying freely now, the tears carving clean paths through the soot on his cheeks. "Losing the house is one thing," he said, "but losing this, losing his voice forever. I knew it would destroy you. It would be like he died all over again, and I couldn't let that happen. I couldn't live with myself knowing I could have saved it for you. I'm sorry if I scared you. I'm so sorry." The wall of ice that had formed around Clara's heart did not just crack, it instantly vaporized. The full, staggering weight of what he had done slammed into her. He had not been thinking of himself. He had not been thinking of some selfish secret. He had been thinking of her. He had been thinking of her heart, of her grief, of the things he knew she could not bear to lose. A sob, a raw, ragged sound of pure, overwhelming emotion, tore from her throat. It was a sob of shame for her accusations, of guilt for her doubt, and of a love so immense it felt like it might split her in two. In her moment of greatest physical fear, he had looked past it and seen a deeper, more lasting pain he could prevent. He hadn't abandoned her. He had performed the most selfless act of love she had ever witnessed. She surged forward, closing the distance between them and wrapping him in a fierce, desperate embrace. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, her tears soaking the collar of his smoke-scented shirt. "I'm sorry," she wept, the words muffled and choked with emotion. "Oh, Alex, I am so sorry. I didn't see. I was so scared, and I didn't understand." He held her just as tightly, his own body shaking with the release of the tension and fear he had been holding in. In that embrace, in the quiet living room of a kind neighbor, surrounded by the ashes of their past, they found each other again. The fire had burned away all the petty misunderstandings and the perceived distances, leaving only the pure, unbreakable core of their bond. The scorched wooden box sat on the table between them, no longer a symbol of betrayal, but a sacred relic. It was a testament to a son who knew his mother's heart better than she did herself in a moment of crisis. He had gambled his life, Not for a thing, but for a feeling. He had run back into the flames to save her from a future of unbearable regret. The question of rescue or betrayal was finally answered, and the answer was more complex and beautiful than she could have imagined. He had rescued her, not once, but twice. He had pulled her from the fire, and he had saved her from the even greater pain of losing the last echoes of her great love. His action was the ultimate rescue, a profound and lasting gift born from the ashes of a tragedy.